In today's fast-paced environment, it's absolutely essential that we can automate the testing and delivery of our code. That's where GitHub Actions comes in. It's the built-in CI/CD tool for GitHub. If you're unfamiliar with what CI/CD is, it stands for Continuous Integration and Continuous Delivery. Essentially, it allows us to automate the testing of our code to make sure it meets certain criteria. After all the tests are passed, you can enable Actions to automate the delivery of your code. This can significantly reduce the time it takes for you to deliver updates to your application, which allows developers to focus more of their time on the code itself. In this video, I'm going to go over all the theory you need to know to understand the GitHub Action workflow. In the lab portion of this video, we'll go over how to implement our own GitHub action and implement a linter that will run checks against our code to make sure that it meets specific criteria. So to start us off, let's go over the terminology you need to know to understand a GitHub Actions workflow file. So we have a workflow YAML file which specifies events, jobs, runners, steps, and actions. So an event is a trigger for a workflow. A common event that occurs in a repository is when someone pushes new code. You can see that in this configuration file, we specify the workflow to trigger when someone pushes new code. When the event occurs, it's going to run all the jobs within the workflow. In this workflow, we have a single job named superlint that specify multiple steps and actions. You can see underneath the steps, there's two actions that are being run. First, it's going to check out our code, and then it's going to run the superlinter against it. Up here, you can see the runs on parameter, and this is where we specify our runner. Basically, this is a container environment that will run our code. By default, GitHub runs this container for you, but you can host your own runner if you would like to. The default containers to choose from are Ubuntu Linux, Microsoft Windows, and Mac OS. So to put it all together, on the event that someone pushes new code, it's going to run the job, superlint. That job is going to run on a Ubuntu container hosted on github.com, and then it's going to go through two steps. The first step is to check out the code, and the next step is to run the linter. By the way, if you don't know what a linter is, it's just something that we use to check to make sure that our code is conforming to certain standards. Superlinter is made up of multiple linters, so it doesn't matter which code you use in your repository, Superlinter is going to understand it and make sure you conform to the standards of that language. Alright, so let's hop into GitHub now, and I'll show you everything you need to know to get this working. Okay, so we're on github.com, and what we want to do is create a new repository. So let's go repositories and then click new, and then we can call this whatever we want. So I'll call it my Git Actions, and then scroll down and let's add a README file just so we have a file to work with, and then create repository. So we got this nice clean GitHub repository with a README file in it. The next thing we want to do is create a workflow. So to do that, just go add file and create new file. And then we need to be very specific with our naming here. So the proper directory structure for your workflow files needs to be first .github/workflows. And then you can name your file whatever you want. So I'll go superlinter.yaml, and then I'm going to copy and paste the code. And you can see this is the code that we went over earlier in the video. Basically, it's listening for a push event, and when the push event happens, it's going to first check out our code and then run the superlinter against it to make sure that it conforms to the linting standards. So we can go ahead and commit this now. And you can create a new branch or just commit to the main branch. I'm going to commit to the main branch here. And that's it. And again, just want to stress that this directory structure needs to be exactly like this. If your workflow is not triggering, it's probably because the directory structure isn't named correctly. So let's hop on back to the main repository here. So I'll click code. And you should notice that there's this little status icon now. And you can see it's yellow. Basically what this is saying is it's currently running the workflow and checking the code. If all the checks pass, then this is going to turn green. If the checks fail, then it's going to turn red. So you can actually click on this, or you can click on this Actions tab. So I'll click on the Actions tab, and you can see that it's running the workflow now, and the workflow that it's running is superlinter. And if we click here, you can see that it is linting the code base. Let's open this up and you can see the exact process that it's on. And just open this up. You can see setting up the job, basically just doing the GitHub action stuff, setting everything up. And now it is pulling the code from GitHub/Superlinter. Once it's done that, it's going to check out our code, which is our repository, and then it's going to run the Superlinter against it. So this is pretty cool. It's telling you behind the scenes which code repository it pulled from. If you actually went to this URL, you could see the actual code of the Superlinter job. Anyways, okay, so getting lots of updates here. So the pull worked. It checked out our code fine. You can see, yeah, syncing repository, my GitHub actions, and now it's running the Superlinter against it. And yep, Superlinter worked, and this is the logs. It looks like everything passed. There wasn't a lot of code in our repository, so yeah, passing a linting check isn't too big of a deal. If we head on back to code here, we can see we get a nice little check mark to show that all the workflow checks have passed. So this is another really cool thing that you can actually use downstream. You could have your servers monitor the GitHub API and just check the status of the repository. If the status was a green check mark, it could automatically go to that repository and pull down your code and, you know, implement it into staging or production or whatever you want. But before we get too into that, let's go ahead and push some code that we know is going to generate some linting errors. So I'm going to grab some code here, and I'm going to go add file, create new file, and I'm going to paste this in. And let's give this a name, so I'll just call it main.py. This is some really simple Python code. If you're not familiar with Python, that's okay, but there's some syntax problems with this code that is not going to pass the linting check. The first example is there should actually be 2 lines between each function. And I think I used a tab here, and then I just used like 2 spaces here. So the code style isn't very consistent. This is what's considered messy code, and the linter's not going to like it. It's going to fail it. And, you know, if I was a developer pushing it, I would know that my code doesn't look good. It doesn't pass the linter, and I would make the fixes and then re-push it. So let's go ahead and save this, commit it, and watch to see what the linter does. So scroll to the bottom and just commit new file. And let's refresh here. And we can see that it is triggered now. If we just click here, 1 in progress check, and we can just go details, and it brings us here. So I'm not going to make you sit through this. I will speed up the video and we'll check to see the errors. Okay, so our Superlinter has run, and we can see that there is an error in our workflow right here on the run Superlinter. So let's go into it, and I'll show you sort of how to troubleshoot these errors. It's a little bit difficult when you're first getting started, but if you read the errors, they sort of make sense. Go down here, you see info, and then errors. Found error in black linter. And it's just saying the file is main.py. So we know that the file that has issues is main.py. This is very relevant if you're pushing to a repository that, you know, has hundreds of files in it. You want to get the file name here. So here's basically the code, and the pluses are the lines that it would add, and the minuses are the lines it would remove. So it's basically saying add an additional line here. Take out this line and then replace it with this one that has 4 spaces, and then add an additional line below. So let's go ahead and do that. I will head on over to the code, go to main.py, and edit this. So it said add an additional space here. So this is just basic PEP8 formatting, and I can see it's adding white space, so let's remove that, because the linter won't like that. And then let's remove this and then do 4 spaces just to make everything consistent. And then it wanted an additional line here. And again, for some reason, the online GitHub editing tool is adding a bunch of white space. So this looks good. This should pass, I hope. So let's commit the changes. We're going to go ahead and let this run, and I'll pause the recording and resume once our linter comes back with either a pass or fail. Okay, so just refreshed, and we can see that everything passed. If I hop back in here, we can go to the details of the latest job, and you can see that the super linter ran and everything looks good. So let's just explore the GitHub Actions a little bit more. We'll go up here to Actions, and you can see that we have a history of all our workflow jobs. So this one was our first run before we added the Python file with the bad formatting, and this was the second run with the bad file, and then after we made the fix. Over on this side, you can see you can sort of filter by specific workflows. So you could have a bunch of different workflows in the same GitHub repository. You're not limited to just like a single workflow or anything like that. And if you wanted to filter, you just click here, and that automatically fills out the filter. Now, if you wanted to go through a guided setup instead of just writing your file from scratch like we did, you can go New Workflow right here. And you can see that there's a lot of templated options. So for this one, it looks like it just repackages up your code and pushes it to PyPy. A bunch of other stuff here. And I noticed this page is super laggy. Maybe it's just my browser, but I think it's just the finicky GitHub Actions thing. But basically what I'm trying to say is there's a marketplace with a lot of canned workflows that you can just grab, and then you can just modify the file to meet your needs. So that's a really good option if you're just starting out and you're just exploring. Just have a look at the marketplace, grab what you think would be good, and then just sort of customize it as you go along. So anyways, that's all I wanted to do for this GitHub Actions introduction. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please go ahead and hit that like button for me to get this information out to other DevOps engineers that need it. And if you're interested in learning more about DevOps, programming, or just IT in general, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video.